Good evening. Welcome to this evening's event. This, as you know, is part of the ongoing SIGIN National Colloquium on Global Health Challenges for the 21st Century. We are indeed fortunate this evening to have Dr. McFarlane join us, but before I ask Laundry to introduce her, I want to say a little bit about Laundry. Laundry was a student in my UC 150 class last year. She is really an aspiring pre-med student, and it's really an honor to have her here to introduce our speaker for this evening. So would you please join me in welcoming Andre to the podium?
Dr. Deborah A. McFarlane is a professor in the Department of Global Health and the Department of Health Policy and Management at the Rollins School of Public Health of Emory University. Her specialty is in international healthcare financing and health systems research and practice. Dr. McFarlane has been involved in health policy and health financing issues for the past 30 years, with particular interest in the interface of disease control programs and health systems, and the ethics and economics of resource allocation for public health priorities. She is or has been a member of the World Health Organization Neglected Tropical Diseases Scientific and Technical Advisory Group, the WHO Technical Consultative Committee for Africa Program on Onchocerciasis Control, the WHO UNICEF Tropical Disease Research Special Advisory Committee, and the McTizan Expert Committee for Neglected Tropical Diseases. She was a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow in Health Policy and Finance at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and with the National Governors Association on Capitol Hill. She is one of the 3 founders of the African Religious Health Assets Program, a group of scholars and practitioners who are engaged with the intersection of health systems and religious structures. She is a director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Endowed Fagey Fellowship Program in the RSPH, the Global Field Experience Program, and the Peace Corps Masters International Program. She is an Open Society Foundation International Scholar, supporting the development and strengthening of public health graduate education in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. Dr. McFarlane has been awarded numerous teaching awards, including the highest honor for teaching at Emory University, the Emory Williams Distinguished Teaching Award, as well as the 2017 Teaching and Mentoring Excellence Award for the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health, which is the highest teaching award in the U.S. Schools of Public Health. Dr. McFarlane holds a PhD in Strategic Management and Industrial Organization Economics, an MSc in Economics, and an MPH in Health Policy and Management, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Biology. All right. I think I said everything. But please help me in welcoming Dr. McFarlane.
Thanks, Lindy. So we're a small group. Why don't you move up? I guess neglected tropical diseases are not as palatable after dinner as people might think. So just move on up. That would be great. Thank you, Landry. And thank you, Dr. Quaid, for the invitation to this symposium. I'm impressed at the people that you've had here and the astonishing array of backgrounds that you've had. Dr. Quaid and Quaid or Quayle? Quaid. And Landry. Dr. Quaid, when he invited me, did not know that I actually I am a graduate of OWU. 150 years ago. Not quite, but almost. And I understand that last weekend was homecoming, so I should have been here. But I haven't been back since I graduated. So I don't know my way around campus, and I can't really find where I am. But in some ways it looks the same. In other ways it's quite different. All these new buildings are great. What I want to talk about today is something that some of you may know something about. this notion of neglected tropical diseases. But first I wanted to give you a short walk through my own history from Owu to now. So let me walk through that. Linda did a good job. I'm always embarrassed to read those because the more you've been at this, the longer your introduction is. And they should just say, people have been around a long time and they've done a lot of things, and that would be a good way to end. So let me just, so I started at Ohio Wesleyan, and as I told my colleagues over dinner, I was really a bad student, really a bad student. I was much more involved in politics, and I'm not sure that I took real advantage of everything that OWU had to offer, but I'm delighted that there is so much now on offer here at the university. From there, I graduated, and when in doubt then, and not knowing what to do, I joined the Peace Corps, which is a bit unfair to the Peace Corps and to the countries where we work, because we were, most of us, very inexperienced and didn't know a great deal about what we were doing. But it is in the Peace Corps that I really discovered public health. Here's a question for you. How many of you, how many of you are pre-med? No? You haven't decided? Have any of you have ambitions, or have you even thought about public health as a career? Nobody thinks about public health. I didn't know anything about public health. When I graduated from OWU, there was no such thing as a public health program. There were I didn't know what public health was. So when I was offered the opportunity as a Peace Corps volunteer, or to join a group as a volunteer for a public health program, I had to ask, what is public health? I'm still asking, what is public health? And it is lots of different things, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. So I went into the Peace Corps, into country in West Africa, Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire, right on the border between Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa. And as I said, got immersed in public health, but really got immersed in the political economy of public health, in the politics of public health, in the politics of health services and health systems. That's what they're called now. I didn't know what they were then, but I knew that I was interested in the intersection of politics and healthcare. And that grew out of several experiences that were pretty negative in West Africa, because it's a very, very weak health system and an overwhelming burden of disease. When I left Peace Corps, I couldn't decide what to do, so wandered for about a year, and ultimately decided that what I wanted to do was do an MPH, a Master's of Public Health, so I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And it was there I really started my public health journey. After graduating with an MPH, again, I asked my advisor, what should I do? I want to do something interesting. I want to do social justice. I want to see what the realities of life in the United States in very rural and underserved areas. And so he suggested I join what was then called the United Mine Workers Health and Retirement Funds. So I spent 10 years working in Central Appalachia for the UMWA. I wasn't a miner, because women can't be miners. Did you know that? Now they can. Well, I'm not even sure they can. There's a real, there's very much a sense that women are not allowed in the mines, and that they are a curse for working in the mines. There are a few women miners now, but as the coal mining industry has caved, and then there are fewer miners, much less female miners. What's that? You can just stand up and shout questions. We're a small group if you want. Anyway, the United Mine Workers Health and Retirement Funds was a place where the union and was putting into action and trying to provide health services in a part of the world, in a part of the United States that's very underserved. And in some ways it was almost a domestic Peace Corps experience. Very underserved, highly isolated, and this gave me an opportunity, again, to engage in the politics of healthcare. And I started studying economics, and after 10 plus years living and working in central Appalachia and East Tennessee, in the coal mining areas, I decided I really needed to study economics. And so I went to study at LSE at the London School of Economics, mainly because I wanted an international economics degree that was going to allow me to work around the world. And there, again, I really was involved in the political economy of health and health services. Fascinating time, and was there for a number of years. At the same time that I was working with the United Mine Workers, I was also teaching at the University of Tennessee, which was in Knoxville in East Tennessee, and ultimately came back and did my PhD there from London. And then couldn't decide again what I wanted to do. You'll see that there's a theme here, that I'm a dilettante and didn't really have a very clear pathway. But in retrospect, the pathway has been, the pathway has been there. I just wouldn't have anticipated what it was when I started. From, after having finished my PhD, I thought, okay, now what? And I really wanted to go back and do international work, which is what I was doing at LSE. And the opportunity arose for, and I was offered a position at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta at the International Health Program Office to really be their health financing specialist and health economics, health economist. Because I had both a public health background and economics, that was an unusual combination, and they wanted someone who could work in international health at the intersection of economics and public health. Great opportunity for me. And so I spent several years at CDC, and while there also began teaching right across the street at Emory. Emory is right across the street from CDC in Atlanta. Gives us an opportunity gives us an extraordinary opportunity to have access to all of that CDC offers. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, was involved in a number of child survival programs and malaria programs in West Africa and Central Africa, and that's what I worked on again for a number of years. But all the time teaching just as an adjunct at Rollins at the School of Public Health, and then ultimately moved over to the Department of Global Health and Health Policy and Management at Rollins, which is where I am now. So here's a factoid for you, a trivia fact. Why is CDC located in Atlanta? All other federal agencies are located where? Washington, D.C. Why is CDC, a federal agency, located in Atlanta? The answer is because it was started right after, during World War II, and many people, many men then, were going to war, and they were being sent to the South Pacific and Asia, where they were getting malaria. Malaria was a dangerous disease, and nobody knew the military didn't know very much about malaria. And the only place in the United States where malaria still existed was in the South. The Woodruff family, which is the family that started Coca-Cola, had land in Atlanta, right next to Emory University, and they gave it the long-winded, circuitous path. So nobody comes into public health saying when they're 5 years old, what I want to be when I grow up is a public health practitioner. Nobody does that. So I started, as I said, in Appalachia after I came back from Peace Corps and after finishing my MPH. And these are some scenes from what the coal mining camps looked like in the 60s. 40s, 50s, 60s, there was no change. There was a very famous report called the Boone Report that said that the donkeys in the mines, because what was used to take the coal out of the mines in the 40s, 50s, before the mines were, before they got the electric carts, what were mules and donkeys. And it was said in this report that the donkeys in the mines are treated better than the miners. It was a devastating critique. It was the first time that an occupational disease called silicosis had been actually recognized in the United States. Although in Britain, silicosis was a disease that had been recognized since the 30s. It took us until the 70s to recognize it. And again, here, my role was always on healthcare financing, on healthcare delivery, and on advocacy and agitation. So how did I get into neglected tropical diseases? That's a very, very, very tortuous way, and I haven't said anything about neglected tropical diseases. Can anyone name a neglected tropical disease? Can anyone give me a neglected tropical disease? Have you ever heard of NTD? Okay, well, good. Then I have to start from scratch. All right. So what I'm going to do, Elaine, I hope. Yeah. Okay, so it did work. All right. Uh-oh. You were right, Elaine. It's not linking. Okay. If there's one thing that you learn in public health and in global health is that you have to be adaptable. You have to be flexible. So that was a short film on just what are neglected tropical diseases. But I will tell you what neglected tropical diseases are. Just what are NTDs? And how does someone with a health financing, health economics background get involved in neglected tropical diseases, NTDs, and I'll tell you that in just a moment. So NTDs are this group of communicable diseases that exist in tropical and subtropical countries and exist in about 140 countries now at different levels of endemicity. They affect more than over 1 billion people, and the populations that live in poverty are the ones that are most affected. The people that live, as we very often say, the people that live beyond the end of the road. People that are living in endemic countries where the health system is weak or non-existent, where the burden of disease of these neglected tropical diseases is very high, and where they often overlap. So they have multiple NTDs that exist in one community. They debilitate, they deform, they blind, and to a lesser extent, they kill. NTDs are diseases that are neglected in terms of research, in terms of services available, in terms of treatment, and they exist among the most neglected people. So we often say that they are neglected diseases among neglected people. There's no constituency for neglected tropical diseases. Yet, Why are we interested in NTDs? Because NTDs as a whole are one of the leading causes of morbidity, disability in the world. And we can eliminate them, and that's what I want to talk about today, because that's a public health success. So this is from the latest, what we call weekly epidemiological record, just from early October. And the important thing about this slide is that the treatments that we have for neglected tropical diseases, I'll read this, the treatment figures of preventive chemotherapy implementation in 2016 are exceptional in the history of NTD control and elimination effort, as the landmark number of treating 1 billion people in 1 year was achieved. 1 billion people in 1 year. We delivered almost 5 billion treatments to over 1 billion individuals for at least one of the NTDs. That's an extraordinary success, one that you're never going to read about in class, one that you don't hear about in the newspaper. How did it start? Here's how it started. This is a village in West Africa, in Nigeria, a place that I have worked for many years. And this is a very common sight. This is a young person leading an older person who is blind. Why is the young person, the young child, leading this elderly man? Because that's the only way he can get around. So what this does is takes out of the family structure, takes out of productivity, takes out of economic life two people. The child, no longer in school, and the blind person, not able to work in the fields. Why do I say this is the beginning? Because the beginning of controlling and eliminating neglected tropical diseases really began in 1987 with the donation by Merck, the pharmaceutical company, of this drug called Mectizan, or ivermectin, for as long as needed for onchocerciasis control. Onchocerciasis control is river blindness. It's transmitted by flies. The flies live along the free-flowing rivers. That's the most productive land. People live along the rivers. They get bitten repeatedly by the flies. The flies transmit the worms, the microfilariae. The microfilariae congregate in the skin. People itch like crazy. The skin begins to dissipate, and ultimately the worms migrate to the eye, and it creates non-reversible blindness. Merck found in the mid-'80s that this drug, Mectizan, or ivermectin, could be used safely in humans to interrupt the transmission of the worms, the microfilariae. It's an extraordinary contribution. Mectizan was no longer a brand. It was a generic drug. And Merck, the pharmaceutical company, was making billions of doses of ivermectin that you now use, many of you probably have used, for your cats and dogs, for deworming. So it is a drug that has been used in the veterinary community for many years. But Merck, with a lot of research, discovered that in fact Mectizan, or ivermectin is the generic name, could interrupt the transmission of these microfilariae, thus not allowing them to accumulate in the skin and to migrate to the eye, and thus ultimately eliminating causes of blindness. Merck pharmaceutical company said they were going to donate this drug for as long as needed to control onchocerciasis. It's an amazing contribution. We in public health are very skeptical of pharmaceutical companies. We just think they're greedy, can I say bastards at OWU? We just think they're greedy guys. They aren't. They do some bad things, they charge some high prices, but in this instance, they have done extraordinary things. So the story, in 2015, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to Dr. Campbell, who was the discoverer of ivermectin. The story goes that this man, Dr. Bill Foege, who is my public health hero, was the then executive director of the Carter Center in Atlanta, President Jimmy Carter's presidential library and center. President Carter was sitting in a meeting with the chief executive officer of Merck, and the chief executive officer said, President Carter, we're willing to give you this drug for as long as needed to control onchocerciasis. Will you take it? And President Carter called Dr. Foege and said, should we do this? And Dr. Foege said, absolutely. Everybody else in the public health community was totally opposed to this because of what I just said. So much skepticism on the part of the public health community for pharmaceutical companies. Dr. Foege said, this is a great opportunity. We got to do this. And that was the beginning of what we now call pharmacophilanthropy, which is the donation of drugs, off-patent drugs, by major pharmaceutical companies to dedicate to the elimination and or control of one or more neglected tropical diseases. And many of those donation programs are based in Atlanta at a place called the Task Force for Global Health, which is what Dr. Foege started 25 years ago. So Merck and GlaxoSmithKline give Mectizan and albendazole for onco and lymphatic filariasis. Johnson & Johnson gives it for worms. Pfizer gives it for Zithromax for blinding trachoma, and on and on and on. And this amazing contributions and donations on the part of these massive, big pharmaceutical companies has made the elimination of neglected tropical diseases, many of them, possible. Without the drug donations, we would not be able to get them. So the drug company said, okay, to the public health community, if you can get these drugs to the right people at the right time for as long as needed, and you can do it in an efficient and an effective way, we will provide the drug for as long as you need. And so far, they've been true to their promise. So it was up now to the public health community and the non-governmental organizations and ministries of health and governments to make sure that those drugs got to the right people at the right time for as long as needed. So this is how we do it. It's through a mechanism called Mass Drug Administration, MDA. Only made possible because of these pharmaceutical donations, and all community-based. So drugs are provided and donated, and it's up to the NGO community, the ministries of health, the governments, and the communities to get them in the mouths of the right people. And these drugs are totally, there's no severe adverse events, and so this is, they're safe for, yes ma'am?
Are there any pharmaceutical companies in other countries that are doing this as well?
Yes, GlaxoSmithKline is a UK-based company. Eisai is a Japanese company. Bayer MG is a German company. So it's the pharmaceutical industry globally, not just in the United States. Yes, sir. Good question. Yes, the question is always, why would a pharmaceutical company do this? And so your question is right, and that is, what is the enticement, what is the incentive for pharmaceutical companies to donate this massive amount of drugs? Because there are billions of doses that are needed. And part of it is, yes, it's a tax write-off. All right, there's no doubt about that. But I know for a fact, and have been at the manufacturing facility for Mectizan, which is based in Holland, in Haarlem, in Holland, where these drugs are produced. We visited there a couple of years ago, and to see the production process, and to, when I say we, many who are involved in the NTD work, many from the countries, the endemic countries, and the employees of Merck never see the end result of all the drugs that they produce. They just produce them and ship them out. The NTD community never sees where the drugs are produced, so they don't know where they come from, they just assume that they come. So this was a marrying of the two. Merck, and I've talked to many Merck employees, GlaxoSmithKline employees, are very proud of this. They're very proud of their companies for having participated in this, and they are very proud to have this as a potential benefit that we're going to eliminate these horrific, disabling diseases. So yes, there's a tax write-off, but there's also, I'm not cynical enough to think that there aren't true philanthropic and compassion interests and values that the employees have, that they really are, they value this as part of their job. So thanks for the question. It's a good question. This is how it's done. Again, this is from Nigeria, just because that's a country where I've done much work over the years. So at the community level, these drugs are come in by the regular systems, essential medicine systems, set up in the middle of a village. There are community health workers, like this gentleman here. People are asked to come after they've been sensitized, motivated, they understand what the drug is for, brought into the center of the village. Sometimes it's door to door, and every community health worker has a stick. And the stick has colors on it. A person stands up next to the stick, and where the person's, the top of the head meets the stick is how many tablets they get. Because we don't have the ability to weigh everybody, we don't have the ability to measure. So the stick is a very simple, accommodating way to find out how many tablets a person needs. So this gentleman is going to need 3 tablets. Somebody up here is going to need 4. If a person is down, you can't see the lower part. If a child is below the lower bar, that means the child doesn't get the drug. Pregnant women don't get the drug. But all of this is done at the community level, as we say, at the grassroots. In this instance, they are distributing what's called praziquantel, which is for a disease called schistosomiasis. This is the seminal event that occurred now 5 years ago in London, the London Declaration, where all of the pharmaceutical company CEOs came together and together pledged that they were going to donate these drugs for as long as necessary. Again, an extraordinary event. You might recognize this, you can't really see him. This is Mr. Gates, Bill Gates. And this is the Director General of WHO who just stepped down, Dr. Margaret Chan. And the others are all chief executive officers of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And together, they came together and said, we can eliminate these diseases. There is no reason for them to exist. We've got the drugs. We need to get the drugs to the right people at the right time. I was amazingly privileged to be in this meeting. I was sitting, I think, way back there. And one thing that was said during the meeting was one of the, maybe it was Dr. Chan or maybe it was Mr. Gates, I can't remember. Somebody said, look around this room. Who's in this room? And it was all white-haired folks, okay? It was not just men, but a lot of white-haired men. And one of the problems with NTDs and these parasitic diseases is there aren't enough young people that are coming along to work on these particular diseases. That's changing now. So the question was asked at this meeting, well, it's 2012 now, we have these goals and the roadmap to eliminate these diseases by 2020. And the question was, how many of you are going to be here in 2020? Okay. We all sat silently, which gave us another impetus to recruit young people like you to work on NTDs from all countries in the world. These are the techniques, these are the interventions that are used to overcome NTDs. The one I focused on, the one with the stick, is preventive chemotherapy, and the others I won't go into any detail unless you want me to. These are what WHO, the World Health Organization, lists as the NTDs, the neglected tropical diseases. And I asked if any of you had ever heard of any of these, could name an NTD. It's no wonder that you can't, because they are neglected diseases of neglected people, right? That together have the second highest burden of disability in the world, global disability. We have the means to eliminate these diseases. We have the moral imperative to eliminate these diseases. We have the contribution of the pharmaceutical companies have turned to us in the public health community to say, now, we've done our part, now you do your part. You ministries of health, you non-governmental organizations, and you communities. So the challenge is that. So all of these are nasty diseases. The ones in green are those that were in the London Declaration that I just showed you. And the ones that I personally have been working on that are preventive chemotherapy diseases are lymphatic filariasis, onchocerciasis, schistosomiasis, soil-transmitted helminths, and trachoma. There is one disease here that is scheduled and is on the cusp of being eradicated, and that's guinea worm. There are 15 worms left in the world from about 8 million 20 years ago. 15 worms. And the Carter Center in Atlanta has been one of the major instigators, motivators, movers, advocates for the eradication of guinea worm. President Carter is a compelling, articulate, thoughtful, visionary, brilliant man who's now 93, 94 years old. I am convinced that President Carter will outlast the last guinea worm. He will not die. I never want him to die, but he will not die until the last guinea worm is gone. That's his passion. And we're close, 15 worms left. Many of my students have been what we call worm chasers in some of the most difficult parts of sub-Saharan Africa, South Sudan, Chad, Nigeria. Many of my students have served a year or more, way out in the bush, chasing that last worm. So these are the ones that are scheduled for what we call elimination. And the target is to hit 2020 to eliminate these diseases globally, these diseases regionally, and these diseases at country level. And we are making amazing progress. There are diseases which do not have drugs, right? Where there are no donated drugs. And so these are what we call intensive disease management diseases that require much more intensive management and require a functioning health system. The one where we are the closest to elimination is Buruli ulcer, which I think, if Dr. Quaid, is one of the countries that has the highest burden of Buruli is Ghana. So Ghana is making progress. After the London Declaration, the World Health Organization created what we call the roadmap for implementation. How are we going to get from 2012 to 2020 and get these drugs to the right people at the right time for as long as needed, safely and efficiently? And Dr. Chan, then the Director General of WHO, said, this is the next step forward in relieving and in many cases finally ending the vast misery caused by these ancient diseases of poverty. Can anyone tell me if there are any diseases that have been eradicated? Yes, sir. Not quite. It's on the verge of eradication, polio, but not quite. There are still 3 or 4 countries in the world where there's active transmission of polio. Afghanistan, Pakistan, up in the northern part of Nigeria, and unfortunately, we think new cases of severe. But almost, not quite. Smallpox is the only human disease that has been eradicated. The last case of smallpox, the final assertion, the final declaration of eradication was in 1977. Since then, no human disease has been eradicated. But we're close on polio and on guinea flu. The closer you get, the harder it is. The more expensive it is. The more difficult it is. But these are all ancient diseases of poverty. They have been around for millennia. I won't read through these, but every year the World Health Organization produces a report on neglected tropical diseases, which combines all of the research, all of the data, and all of the work and all of the distribution that has been going on. So this is the second one. This is one that I was intimately involved with on making the investments case. How are we going to keep pharmaceutical companies, ministries of health, other donors involved in continuing to fund the programs for the elimination and eradication of these diseases? So this was a report that I was very heavily involved in, investing to overcome the global impact of neglected tropical diseases. And the last report, sorry for the fuzziness, just came out in April, and that is to integrate NTDs into global health and development. And what is the key driver of global health and development right now? The Sustainable Development Goals. Have any of you heard of the Sustainable Development Goals? SDGs? Yes? No? Millennium Development Goals. Okay. So these are goals that are set by the UN and by countries around the world that are aspirational goals about development. Millennium Development Goals went from 2000 to 2015, and the Sustainable Development Goals now go to 2015 to 2030. So the key for us in NTDs, because the Sustainable Development Goals are the drivers of humanitarian assistance, official development aid, we have to make sure that NTDs are part of the agenda. And that's one of my roles and those in the community that work together. I won't go through that. I'll leave these slides, but we go from control to elimination to eradication to extinction. I told you that there's one disease, one human disease that's been eradicated, and that's smallpox. 2 more that are close, but there are many, the NTDs, that are on the verge of elimination, and almost all of them for control. Extinction we haven't hit yet. This is what is needed. This was a slide that World Health Organization put together back in 2015 that shows the number of treatments that have been provided, the proportion of people that have been treated, and the coverage rates that have been achieved. And in order to control and or eliminate these NTDs, we have to reach this red line. If we keep on the same trajectory, we're not going to get there. So the key is to scale up and to ramp up very quickly so that we can reach this 75% coverage target and sustain it to 2020. And that's why I said 1 billion people have been treated last year with over 1 billion doses. So this is our challenge. And when I say our, it really is it is a partnership of communities, governments, ministries of health, non-governmental organizations, pharmaceutical companies, and global health agencies. All of us are in all of that arena in now mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, are working day and night to make sure that this 75% coverage of the endemic communities are going to be reached for as long as they need to be in order to eliminate those diseases. Three countries are the big burden: India, Indonesia, and Nigeria account for 50% of the global burden. If you can't make a dent in India, Indonesia, and Nigeria, we're not going to hit the 2020 objectives. The top 10 countries account for 70% of the global burden. So if you're the NTD community and you are targeting your resources, the place to target the resources is to these top 10 countries, and particularly the top 3. Because if you can't address those, we're going to fail. Yeah. The other countries? Primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, but a lot of smaller countries like Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, where the burden is coming down, all right? The burden is coming down, so there aren't so many, but there are a lot of countries. And small Pacific Island countries like Vanuatu, Fiji, believe it or not, and countries in Southeast Asia, Laos, Cambodia, okay? But they all have different NTDs. So the ones that are the most responsive to the preventive chemotherapy are primarily in India and Nigeria and other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. So I understand that Dr. Quaid takes a group to Tanzania. Tanzania has a very successful NTD program. So I've said here that Atlanta is a hotbed of NTD work, and much of it is under the radar, just like NTDs. And I've mentioned, so there's CDC, Centers for Disease Control, which is involved in research and policy, the Task Force for Global Health, which orchestrates these drug donations, advocacy, operations research, the Carter Center, which is program implementation, MAP International, which is implementation, Emory, which is research, policy, economics, and the University of Georgia, not in Atlanta, but almost close enough that we consider them part of the consortium. So it's an extraordinary place to be in Atlanta. It's still a small number of people and advocates, but it's such a privilege to be part of the group. Dr. Chan, just before she stepped down, said that NTD control is one of the best rags to riches story in public health. Again, it's a story that doesn't get told very often, and it's a story that we in this country should be proud of. Our pharmaceutical companies have made a huge difference, and they have continued to do so. She calls these a frontal assault on a root cause of poverty. And success has provoked a question, can poverty be treated with pills? I'll leave you with that. You can write an essay. That's your exam question. Can poverty be treated with pills? There are challenges. How do you keep communities going? How do you keep the CDDs motivated? And that's an important challenge. I won't. And these are just some of the Mass Drug Administration photographs in different parts of the world. And you can see that in many ways the strategy is the same but is adapted in the particular countries in which the Mass Drug Administration campaigns are done. But it's all done by community volunteers. One of the big challenges is, as the disease incidents come down, can communities continue to stay interested? Can volunteers continue to be motivated? And that's something that I've been working on for a number of years. I won't go into that. Have you guys looked at universal health coverage? No, it's too complicated. Okay. Let me just say that I started with this and I'll end with this. It has been, for me, a very fulfilling and exciting path. I never would have thought that a health services, health financing, public health economist would ever get involved in something like the control and elimination of neglected tropical diseases. But here I am, and I'm happy to be here. It's an amazing group of people, and the unsung heroes and heroines are the community volunteers. Their compassion and their continued commitment is the foundation of this strategy. With their help, without them, it won't be done. So continuing to motivate, continuing to trust in the volunteer ethos of these volunteers, these community volunteers, is what we're counting on. So with that, I'll say, who knows where you'll end up starting here. You may go through all of these. I hope some of you do. And I hope that the next picture of the London Declaration on the end of neglected tropical diseases has a lot of non-gray hairs in the front row. A lot of young people like you. Okay? Thanks. I didn't show you any ugly pictures because they are too ugly. Sorry? Identification early on of case finding, so that you identify cases and then treat, and you interrupt the transmission before the transmission can occur to other people. And right now, the biggest challenge in leprosy control is morbidity control. Those people that have leprosy are making sure that they are managed well. Leprosy still exists in many, many parts of the world. We don't think about it, but it certainly does. That's what it does today. Okay, instead of seeing it from above. Next picture.
Say that this is a very refreshing and exciting presentation of good news. And darn, we don't get enough of this. And I'm proud of the path that you've taken and laid the groundwork for other future Wesleyan graduates.
Well, thank you. It is good news, and I started that way because you're right. In public health, all we do is we're doomsayers. This is good news. We're going to make it. I hope you will never see a case of lymphatic filariasis. You will when you go to Haiti, because unfortunately one of the biggest countries with the biggest burden of disease of lymphatic filariasis is Haiti. Elephantiasis, that's what you probably have heard it. But there's no new transmission. So what we have there is existing cases. So look out for them, okay? Yeah.
So how do you deal with events like recently we had in Puerto Rico, which a massive hurricane that destroyed everything?
Yeah.
How do you guys deal with natural disasters that do similar things in places in Africa where they may not have the money to rebuild?
Well, again, a good question. In South Sudan, or in Sudan, even before South Sudan became a country, there was a consortium of non-governmental organizations that all came together and to immunize the children of Sudan, and particularly the children in South Sudan. And they created what were called corridors of peace, that the warring parties put down their weapons for a day, 2, 5, in order to provide a corridor so that all children could be immunized. And in some ways, that's what we try to do with NTDs. Because the drugs have to get to the communities, there's no doubt about that, so the supply chain has to be there. That's our responsibility. Once they get to the communities distribute the drugs. And they do so, and it only happens annually, so it doesn't have to happen that often. It's not like it happens every month. There can be some delays, and there can be opportunities, but the corridors of peace, the corridors through war-torn countries, through places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we have a hard time reaching the communities, but we've still been able to do so because communities have seen the results. So I'm not a Pollyanna. It's hard work. It takes a lot of people, and it does take a lot of money. But on a per capita basis and a per treatment basis, our treatment cost per delivery of one of these drugs or an integration of multiple drugs for neglected tropical diseases is less than 50% per person. Pretty good. that's a good investment? Good question. Okay? Thank you, guys. Appreciate your attention. Okay.